You're listening to episode 24 of Lift as We Rise. My name is Roshni Gajjar, and thank you for making time to listen to our last show of 2022. Our guest today joins us from Berlin in Germany, and he's here to talk to us about supply chain resilience using blockchain technology. Frank Kottler is a product manager at a company called ChainStep, also based in Germany, and ChainStep specializes in blockchain solutions for businesses across a number of sectors. Now, Frank, we've been wanting to put this conversation together for many months, and finally we're here to have this chat. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot for the invitation and for having me, Roshni. I'm looking forward to our talk today.
An absolute pleasure. And Frank, when you and I shared a panel in about August, I was struck by your perceptions and your perspectives around ESG and sustainability. And fast forward, I thought this was quite an important conversation to share with our listeners on as We Rise, because since 2018, when I went into consulting on a full-time basis, I was particularly interested in the impact of blockchain solutions on business models and distributed ledger systems on financial systems. And it seems now, after listening to a bit of what you were sharing, that the time for this has come.
I hope so, at least, because indeed, looking at creating an impact for a product throughout the whole supply chain, that's been on the agenda for many years already. I personally originally come from the textile industry, where we have been looking at improving the sustainability of the products in cooperations with direct suppliers, but more importantly, in cooperations with the indirect suppliers and the whole supply chain. And it's no secret that most of the impact produced by a product that we consume um, is not being made by the final supplier or the brand that you're procuring a product from. Instead, it's happening in the deeper supply chain. We've been trying to access this deeper supply chain in a various kind of ways. And now comes the advent of blockchain technology, and we see great potential here to make it much easier for a whole supply chain to understand their impact, to share their impact with direct and indirect players, and finally also to improve through the system the impact of the final product that arrives at the end consumer. The time might have come. Definitely, the technology is there already. Now the question is more about how can we actually convince suppliers, supply chains, and brands that um, looking a lot deeper into your supply chain actually provides business value.
Yeah, Frank, and that's really why I was keen to have this conversation and share it with our listeners, because the principle of responsible business is becoming a fairly commonly used term. But there are so many aspects to that we need to unpack, understand, and convert into business models. So I thought there's no one better to speak to. I mean, you completed a master's in logistics management. Then you went on to complete further studies in international business and sustainability. And then, as if that wasn't enough, a doctorate in business ethics. Frank, what makes you so passionate about supply chains and sustainability in supply chains? What's your purpose?
Well, my purpose is that we all know, and especially people from the younger generations, like you and me, we all know that in order to create a livable environment on this planet, we need to somehow rethink our consumption patterns. But yeah, we're looking at reducing and changing our consumption, and it's always painful for human beings to reduce what they already have to lower their consumption. So while this is an important and not to be left out strategy in our whole sustainability endeavors, what's also important is to make our current consumption patterns, or our current consumption levels, more sustainable, more efficient towards the environment, and also towards the social life, working conditions all over the world. Um, and hence my passion, because I'm looking to create value for businesses, but also to create value for consumers, in the sense that we can attain our sustainability goals while perhaps still reducing our consumption, but reducing maybe less than we ought to if we don't make our supply chains more sustainable. So we're looking here really at trying to um, keep up and improve our standard of living while at the same time making our whole consumption more eco-friendly, but also more friendly towards our fellow human beings all over the world who are working hard to produce the products that we are consuming in the Western world.
Frank, your bachelor's thesis was on product complexity, and you applied that model in the context of a company well known, Procter and Gamble.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about what triggered that.
Hmm. Yeah. So at that time, I was working at Procter and Gamble in Geneva, responsible for the whole European, Indian, Middle Eastern, and African market. Um, Specifically working for the brand Oral B. We all know them, making our teeth shiny white. And we found out that we wanted to provide still compelling products to the consumers, but on the other hand, also provide them at an attractive price point and at in a way that creates a whole product portfolio that caters to all products and business and consumer needs. And historically, Procter and Gamble has, well, of course, started their business back in the US and expanded all over the world. And part of their expansion strategy was also mergers and acquisitions with well-known local brands. Um, and that resulted in a product portfolio of um, oral oral care products that was scattered, cluttered. It wasn't really clear which product we should offer to which consumer segment, and it wasn't really clear either how this product complexity interferes with our supply chain efficiency. So in this context, I set out to understand better what are we actually offering uh, to the global markets, as I said, Europe, India, Middle East, and Africa, and how can we uh, harmonize this product portfolio um, so that we can basically reduce the complexity we have in our portfolio and in the supply chain, but at the same time keep up the value we provide to the consumers, but also, of course, to the business.
So, Frank, I'm a firm believer that when you apply theories and see the application work commercially, then it becomes real. And that's where the buy-in really happens.
Oh yes, absolutely. It was very interesting for me in that context to actually put all the theories that I learned in my studies, put them to use and see them work and actually see them create a better offer to the consumers, but also create a more efficient supply chain. That was really exciting to see how a little bit of research, how a little bit of applying what what you've learned can lead to $1 million impacts.
Yeah, so fast forward a few years to where you are now. You're now working with traceability using blockchain at your current company. So at ChainStep and through the work you're doing, what business problem are you solving?
Yeah. Okay. So we are, broadly speaking, our product certBLOC around product traceability, supply chain traceability, is very close to the idea of digital product passports. For the listeners who don't know yet what digital product passports are, there are various industries. As I said, I'm originally, or after Procter and Gamble, I joined the textile industry, and various industries, among them very strongly the textile industry. They are looking towards understanding better where each specific, not only product but also item comes from. So when I say item versus product, I mean the actual item that you hold in hands, not only the SKU. You might have different suppliers for each SKU. You might have, yeah, slightly different raw material inputs. Um, and here, the textile industry, for example, um, would want to have a system that allows us to scan a product, for example, through a QR code. You scan your piece of clothing, your garment, you scan it, and you will receive a detailed account of the journey that your product has made um, throughout its production cycle, starting from, in the best case, starting from the raw material, which is the cotton field, for example, and how it progresses through the different stages of supply chain. So these are digital product passports, and this is what various industries have been working on. But those digital product passports, they have a big problem. And the problem is the conflict between sharing information about your production, about your order, about your product in the supply chain versus protecting your trade secrets. Nowadays, uh, companies or consumers at the end of the supply chain, they would, of course, love to get all detailed information about every single step. However, suppliers on the other side, they're concerned that revealing too much information reveals some trade secrets. They're being left out in the future. That's especially true for traders whose purpose is to aggregate suppliers on the market and then streamline the offer and trade with retailers or trade with brands. Um, and here, yeah, here we have a conflict to resolve. And this is where our product comes in. Um, I'd like to say we are not a digital product passport solution, but we're a base technology that will enable the broad launch of digital product passports in the industry because our technology enables suppliers to share data about specific products, specific production batches, specific items with the rest of their supply chain, but at the same time gives them granular privacy controls for each stage in the supply chain. So saying that, I have, as a supplier, I have a uh, kind of a one-stop shop, one-stop technology where I can record all the relevant information pertaining to my product. But then, if further downstream customers or consumers want to access the information, mm, I can still gauge and I can still control which entity in the supply chain is able to see which part of my data set. So, in this sense, we are trying to provide a universal technology for data exchange in the supply chain, which will in turn enable better traceability and digital product passports.
Frank, thanks. So I think conceptually it is easy enough to understand, what the objectives are and what the ultimate benefits are. But to understand how the implementation works, can we unpack this a little bit? So firstly, let's start with the technology. We're all used to current ERP systems. They can be called various things. What is the underlying technology that we're using?
Okay. Um, the underlying technology of our solution is a blockchain system that works together with, a fairly new paradigm of um, managing your identity. It's called self sovereign identity, which basically means that in contrast to past systems where I have a system provider, it could be some cloud provider for a supply chain cloud. It could be, if we're looking into daily lives, it could be a social media provider when it comes to interaction between consumer like Facebook or whatever. They control your identity, they control the data you store, and we're turning this around. Um, what happens in our system is that the information that you like to record will never leave your own system. You just notify our system that a certain data set is available and you create a fingerprint of that data set. We all know from detective movies that fingerprints are a one-way function of identifying somebody, which means that from if you have somebody's DNA sequence, you can reconstruct their fingerprint, but not the other way around. If a detective collects fingerprints at a crime scene, they cannot reconstruct the DNA of the owner of the fingerprint. And it's the same principle with the data that is being shared with our system. We only share the fingerprint So the system will know there is data available for, yeah, or there is a certain data set available, but the system doesn't have access to the actual values behind that data set. Um, this fingerprint is stored on a blockchain so that it's immutable, which means that even if my data doesn't leave my system, um, at a later stage where I decide to share certain bits of my data with my customer, um, they will be able to understand if I have modified that data or not versus my initial notification. That's the main advantage. And then yeah, this notification is being broadcasted throughout the supply chain, and my customers, indirect customers, and consumers are able to query information directly from me, not through the system, because the system only has the fingerprint, doesn't have my original data. They need to talk to me. Through, yeah, the connection is being made through the system. They need to talk to me, and then I am able to release what I deem appropriate for them. So yeah, here we have a very interesting interplay of blockchain technology, but also other paradigms of distributed computing, which is self-sovereign identity in our case. Um, I believe in America, they call the same paradigm a little different. They call it decentralized identity or distributed identity, but it all pertains to the same paradigm of how we store and share data.
Frank, you alluded earlier to the principle of data security and data confidentiality. So
Mm-hmm.
that strikes me. If you have a private system, which most businesses have, and then you have a peer to peer or a more public system, how in this type of model
Mm-hmm.
do you balance transparency with data confidentiality and security?
Basically, what we're trying to do is replicate authority on information sharing in the same way that we have it in traditional business processes. Meaning that if I'm completely separated from any IT systems in place, just looking at the business logic. If I'm a supplier and you're my customer and you want information from me, you come to me, you ask me for information. And I'll decide if I give that information to you, if I withhold that information, if I'll only release part of that information. Um, and this is how trustful business relationships have been established in the past. And this is what's not being considered by current digital product passport solutions. Current digital product passport solutions, they aim at taking this autonomy on information disclosure away from the suppliers, uh, kind of mm, nudging, forcing, you can use whichever term you like here, them to provide all data that will be accessible to whoever owns or controls that system, whoever implemented that system in the supply chain. And that creates barriers to implementation on the supplier side. So the way we're balancing this is by, yeah, by just giving back the control over data sharing back to the supplier. It's as easy as that.
So, Frank, I'm working with a few businesses now that have made big investments in either customized systems or an off the shelf system, let's say in the operations space and the finance space. And one of the questions I asked was, we're making this huge investment. Is your system blockchain ready? And the answer wasn't readily available. So, for a business wanting to go down this route, what does it take to prepare for this type of investment?
The easiest thing is if there are standardized APIs to use, application programming interfaces. So our system, in the best case, the users of our system will not even notice that it's there. That's the best case because they still keep interacting with their ERP systems, with their supply chain management system, governance, risk, compliance software, whatever they have in use. And then if these systems are able to talk to other applications, which nowadays they all are, then we would build an integration between the systems that the customer already has in place and, let's say, our data exchange interface, our system that connects the data that you want to share with the rest of your supply chain. Um, that, of course, includes some customization, but the level of customization can really be reduced by working with open APIs. We have a documented API that even a third party can integrate with. So we are really our philosophy is really to create an open ecosystem and not a walled garden. We want to mm, we want to make sustainable supply chain traceability usable for all kinds of industries with all kinds of different vendors, system vendors, but also consulting partners. And for that, we need open ecosystems. We need other entities. We need to give other entities the ability to integrate with our system, to build integrations with our system, and to build integrations between different systems that users already have in place. I'm not saying we can't do that. We can do that as well. But yeah, in the sense of free competition and also really driving the philosophy of making or driving the vision of making supply chains more sustainable. Yeah, this should be accessible to anyone.
Frank, I'd like to understand how you go from beginning to the project management to the end with your clients. Before we get there, though, we're talking about ESG, sustainability, traceability, and supply chains. And I think over the last 2 years, our eyes have been opened widely to the complexity around supply chains and how global these supply chains really are, particularly as it relates to essential services that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. Now, we're speaking at a time, Frank, where the EU is really accelerating its Green Deal, its move towards, carbon pricing parity. This week, they announced a carbon border pricing adjustment. How does this solution that we're talking about today help the principle of product stewardship? Because that's essentially what it is that we're trying to aim for, right?
It's product stewardship. It's also vendor stewardship too. We have basically our system plays out its strongest strengths in the use cases of product compliance and vendor compliance, meaning that we can only improve what we can measure. And this is the main challenge nowadays. When you're looking at product carbon footprints, mm, in the textile industry again, but also, as I said, for various other consumer goods, uh, the biggest part of your product carbon footprint is not produced by the brand or the final manufacturer. It's somewhere upstream in the supply chain. It's your scope 3 footprint that matters most. And it's specifically that scope 3 footprint that very few companies have an understanding of and have access to. And it's historically, it's been very expensive to understand those footprints through supply chain mapping, supplier mappings, life cycle analysis. And here, in this regard, we are really providing whole supply chains a lean tool to record that data and to make and to understand the impact, the wider impact of the product in a much easier and more efficient way. So our tool will be hopefully um, an enabler for for the visibility you need to improve your product and also to improve your supply chain. In the end, we cannot take away this step from the supply chain owner, from the brand. They still need to have this vision of becoming more eco-friendly, becoming more social in the whole supply chain. But yeah, it always starts with a baseline assessment, and it always starts and then it continues with continuous monitoring of the improvement processes and improvement projects that you've started in your supply chain. And it's specifically that assessment and monitoring that we want to enable.
So, Frank, speak to us, how this would be practically implemented in, for example, a space like procurement. So, if my company has invested in the solution and I'm dealing with vendor A, B, and C, and they've got this interface set up, what would we see, and how would we then do business differently as a consequence?
Yeah. Um, our goal is to streamline all those processes around gathering product and production data. So the way it would work is that I still submit my purchase order to my vendor. But then mm, the first change comes in already there. Instead of the vendor accepting this purchase order, um, sending a sales order back to me or whatever, they would simply provide the required or related information in the system, and this provision of information counts as acceptance of the purchase order. And like this, you already have the relevant information that you need in the system that you can, or recorded that the information is available in the system, and you, as a customer, can just query this information. And like that, it would cascade upstream in the supply chain. Those vendors would basically use the same business flow with their vendors, and then connect the different purchasing orders through the supply chain with each other. So by following the flow of purchase orders and the different vendors in turn providing information, product and production information on that purchase orders in the system, it would be very easy for the final customer or anywhere in the middle of the supply chain to reconstruct which purchase orders or which specific production processes, products, and production batches have flown into my final product. So basically, we're building up a data tree of your product, like a bill of materials, basically, but that cascades upstream in your value chain. In the best case, to the raw material, which could be a cotton field, which could be a mineral mine, and it's specifically in those in that extracting sector and agricultural sector where there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of demand for trace for visibility.
Yeah, and if I think back to 2006 was probably the first time, one of the I was in the pharma industry at that time, in the pharmaceutical industry, and that stage, one of the countries were looking at putting an identification tagging system so that when a product recalls happens, you can go right back into the supply chain and understand, um, where trace the source of the product. So that would be one application, I'd guess, and I guess from a scope 3 perspective, just to help visibility around the data that supports your scope 3 calculations, because they certainly are complex, aren't they?
Yes, indeed. And here we are really separating competencies, meaning that we are also partnering with other software companies, providing um, tools and help in the actual impact assessment calculation, because we feel that um, yeah, it's like global division of labor too. It's every company has competencies and strengths in small niches, and our competency definitely lies in enabling the data sharing in the supply chain. However, we still need strong partners, which are the users, the companies themselves, but also other software partners that make proper use of the data. Um, because the data that we can capture with certBLOC, is of wide variety. As you said, just product recalls can be one use case. We can use the same system for anti-counterfeiting measures. We can use the same system for product carbon footprinting and many other applications. So the way you use your data really depends on your own use case as a company, and how you can partner up with other prime solutions on the market to make these changes happen.
So, Frank, from a business case point of view, these investments take time, resources, and clearly a financial
Yep.
investment. So, the other side is the end user or the customer or
Yep.
the client. What are the benefits of this type of solution to your brand equity, your brand
Yep.
value? And you represent a generation that is very keen on buying responsible
Yep.
products. Take us through that lens.
So me personally, because I'm also working in that field, I'm I'm very curious. Whenever I see a product barcode on a shelf, I scan it, and I'm curious what that product barcode or QR code has to tell me. And in the most cases, I can't make a lot of use of the information, because either it is very generic information and it is hard for me to understand whether this is just a marketing claim or it can actually be proven by some underlying sensor data or base data from production systems. Whether this is just aggregated or average data, I simply don't know as a consumer. And in other cases, I simply don't have the option to access information properly. My most recent example, I was on a trade conference about greener manufacturing, actually, and one of the goodies I received was a cotton bag made from sustainable materials, sustainable dyes, whatsoever, global organic cotton, and I just tried to understand the certification of this organic cotton. It had a certification number. I went on the website of the cotton standard, of the GOT standard. I tried to enter this kind of certification number that was presented there. Nothing, no result. I simply couldn't access the information. Luckily, that certification provider or the auditors or the auditing firm who provided that certification to that specific bag was present at the trade conference. So I confronted them. I went to them and said, okay, I have this bag now. I have your certification label on it. I go on the website. Can you please show me how I can get the right information? It took them a while as well. They struggled, but in the end, we were finally able to receive the certificate. But even there, I couldn't get more information than the name of the last trading partner in the supply chain. It was some kind of trading company based in England, and I still don't understand what are now the sustainable materials used. Where did the product journey through? Yeah, maybe that information is available for the suppliers and for companies within their supply chain, but it's definitely not available for the final consumer. And if I hadn't been given this back on the trade fair, but would have wanted it to purchase it in the market, it's not a very compelling argument. I see it's certified. I can't access the certification, but even if I can, I don't really get the information that I need. It rather deters me from buying the product than encourages me. So here I definitely see the value, and this has already been validated with the wider market in textile. European consumers in textile are willing to spend on average 10% more on a garment if they can verify the claims made. And it's specifically that verification that current companies have troubles with. I imagine it in the future that I can just enter a store, I can scan the QR code of a product, and I really see, okay, it has been the cotton comes, I don't know, from somewhere in India. Then it has been shipped to China for production, but that production facility has been awarded certain certifications for worker safety. This will all encourage me in my buying decisions, and I might end up buying this product versus cheaper products that I cannot uh, validate or confirm their provenance. So, yeah, from a consumer perspective, proving what you're claiming definitely adds value.
Yeah, and that's the balance. It's the balance between transparency and data validation so that you can build trust.
Exactly.
And as you clearly pointed out, you just need a few bits of information not to stack up or not be available, and slowly that trust unintentionally
Yep.
starts eroding, and you don't want that.
Yes, absolutely.
So that so then it comes down to planning. It's like any implementation and investment in a system. I guess you've got to plan this properly. Take us through your process.
Yeah.
What does this process look like? Let's go from cradle to grave. Let's use that principle. So I've made the decision as a business. Let's say, for example, I'm using a standard SAP or Oracle or any of the standard systems. How would you take me through this journey?
Well, first of all, if it's your first time implementing a traceability system, I would definitely look at choosing one product line for piloting first in order to understand in order to be also be convinced what is the actual value behind my idea, behind my specific use case that I want to implement with the traceability system. So you would choose a product line. For a piloting project, you would, in the best case, also be able to communicate a little bit with your suppliers beforehand, brief them as well that we are undertaking changes in the process. We are in our business logic, in the flow of submitting and accepting orders. And then we start out with definition, what we actually want to improve. We set our KPIs depending on the use case. That could be, for example, mm, full impact visibility when it comes to product carbon footprint. So understanding kind of heat mapping your suppliers. It could also be improve in sales. If you're here for the sustainability communication with your customers, and well, from there, hopefully the customer already has set up systems that enable them to measure those KPIs. If not, we would be able to help them with that as well. So we create a common basis to validate the success of the project, and from there, we would try to find, if it's a validation project, we would try to find a um, yeah a low tech integration solution that doesn't need too much customization in the beginning, that doesn't need too much effort from our side in the beginning, because it's really for validation. Um, there are different ways to do
Frank,
that depending
sorry,
on.
Frank, give us a sorry, Frank, give us an example of what that low tech system would be.
So, for example, if you have an ERP system in place and you want the ERP system to communicate with our system, you could do it either through a direct integration, which is probably a little bit more effort and more useful if you implement the system throughout all your product lines. But for testing, you could also go through a detour, which is, for example, a CSV export. Every ERP system can do CSV exports of their data sets, and then those CSV you can easily import into certBLOC. It's not a fully automated solution yet, but it's a solution that is very cheap and very quick to test for your validation projects. So here you always have to balance what is your initial effort and um, versus how much reward do you expect for your proof of concept. So we don't usually suggest taking full integration steps when it comes to creating a proof of concept with a customer. Simply for to to save some money for the customer. You would create this kind of low tech integration, work your orders through exports, imports into our system, um, and then from there you would activate your suppliers. Mm, if you're talking one product line only for a validation project, you talk to your suppliers directly and ask them to accept your order not through the regular channel but through the certBLOC system by providing the information. And here you already have your first um, supplier integration and supplier link of data. So you already have um, an, a semi-automated way to gain tier one visibility. So from there, you can extend it again by collaborating with your suppliers to tier two visibility. Maybe this could already be sufficient for a proof of concept, depending on your use case. But I suggest here taking a product line that has a um, very compact number of suppliers and with rather established supplier relationships already, just to make the proof of concept easier and more efficient in terms of time frame. But like this, you would progress a few orders of live orders of your system. You could either go directly through certBLOC, or you can do it in parallel, so that in case anything, there's a hiccup, in case anything doesn't go as planned, you still have your legacy systems in place that shadow the order, so that yeah, mm, your productiveness, your profitability won't be impacted in this sense. You would test it live. Um, you would then make iterative adjustments to the data model you are using with us, to the processes you're using with us, and in the end, after a few orders are processed, we would evaluate the KPIs, the improvement of KPIs. Um, we would create a cost benefit analysis of how our system can, or traceability in general, not necessarily our system, but the mere fact of implementing traceability yields to the improvement of aforementioned KPIs. And then we would discuss next steps, whether it makes sense for all products, for certain product lines only, to implement traceability, and what other use cases the traceability system could be extended on.
Frank, so when I think blockchain, I immediately think of a few other concepts that go alongside blockchain, and that would be collaboration, ecosystem, and consensus. So when one is embarking on a project like this, you know, it's not going to really work if your key stakeholders, let's say for that product line, for that particular supply chain element, don't buy into this. So normally, how would you go about when do you bring your ecosystem on this journey? How do they form part of this decision making process?
Yeah, that's a very important point you're touching on. We've seen in the past that when a supply chain owner, a big brand, or a big retailer is trying to implement traceability without the collaboration of suppliers, then there will be hiccups, there will be delays, there will be questions from the suppliers. You might lose a few of your suppliers, and these are all cases that we want to avoid. Um, there are two options, in my opinion. One is really taking on your key suppliers in the first stage and really collaborating with them from the very first steps of implementation on. Since in the end, I mean, our philosophy is supplier focused. We are solving the problem of suppliers losing their autonomy and information sharing. So it's just in line with our philosophy to include your suppliers in an implementation project from the beginning on. The other option, and those two options can go hand in hand and should go hand in hand, is to modify your business flows in a way that make it very easy for the supplier to embark on the systems. And what I mean by that is what I mentioned before, that you change the way suppliers accept purchase orders, make it easier for them to accept purchase orders, basically simply by uh, clicking on a link in the purchase orders and providing the information requested on the screen that pops up, and like that they're already in the system. Um, so yes, here if you connect those two approaches, collaborating with your suppliers from the very beginning, taking also their feedback and input for your wider implementation, wider rollout of the system, and changing your business flows, I think we're in a good path there to make traceability accessible to your wider supply chain.
Frank, so as much as I'm saying this costs the company money, it also costs the suppliers money. And in something like this, it's an investment in both parties. And in many industries, price sensitivity impacts your negotiations with
Yeah,
suppliers. And
yeah,
we've both been in the procurement space.
yeah,
And so that makes me think around the fact that short term supplier relationships aren't going to be ideal for this type of ecosystem. Am I right in putting that point forward, or does the solution give you the ability to substitute suppliers?
yeah. So yes and no, I would say. I think the main impact on costs for the suppliers is the change management of the processes. Uh, Understanding what business flows are going to change, adjusting to the way you communicate your information with your customers. This will take a little bit time, a little bit. This will be a little bit more inefficient in the beginning because you're embarking on something new. But specifically, what's not producing costs is using our system for the supplier, because we understood that as a supplier who provides data to your customer, you barely get anything from our system in terms of improved visibility, because if you're providing data that the customer will use, they will gain the visibility of your production processes, of your supply chain stages. But you as a supplier, you can't really make use of the data that your customer provides. So really, in this sense, you're also a supplier of data. And because of that, supplying data to your customer shouldn't cost any money. Um, the way we are pricing the solution is more for the customers that they pay to access information, but nobody should pay to provide information. So here we already take cost pressure away from the suppliers, and it's we can see this kind of business model partially being implemented in other solutions as well. And I think it makes utter sense in this in the conversations that I've had. We've had some partners who were complaining that their suppliers need to pay money to use the system, and these systems exist as well. And I'm still wondering how these systems can survive. Apparently they can. Apparently supply chain pressure for some suppliers is big enough that they're being forced into using paid systems, but that's not the case for us.
Okay, Frank, thanks very much. I mean, these are conversations that need to be held between the companies and their stakeholders to build a model that delivers a return on investment, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's look at. I mean, your work has really reached a couple of sectors with really interesting solutions. I was having a look at the automotive space with the Car Trust project, digital insurance, which I was really interested in, education with the blockchain insured certificates. I mean, the higher education industry space could really benefit from something like that. And then something super interesting in the printing and publishing space, blockchain for that industry, for those who are publishing, books. So want to be authors, that might be the way you want to go. Frank, take us through some of these examples. Let's give people a visual idea of how these solutions can work in the marketplace. Which is the favorite project that you'd like to share with us as a case study?
Yeah, well, these some of the solutions that you touched on here, they were not part of the certBLOC product, but more that was part of other consulting projects within our company. Um, but well, in these projects, what I really like to share, you mentioned car trust in the automotive space. Here we are really talking about um, registering your vehicle digitally. And I don't know what is the state in South Africa, but Germany is in many regards when it comes to administration and government work, it lags behind its European neighbors. So nowadays, if you want to register a car in Germany, you wait for weeks for an appointment. Costs you time to travel there. You need follow-up appointments as well to get your to get your number plates and everything. Um, while instead we could just have a digital register for your cars and manage the transfer of ownership in that digital register. It's a very simple but so powerful idea, and finally, it's next year where also we have government authorities embarking on the product with us and with our commercial partner Kroschke here, um, who want to make that actually possible and make the leap into the 21st century with a bit of delay to be able to register your cars digitally. That was quite exciting. Yeah.
Frank, that certainly is an exciting project. And, an example comes very quickly to mind because I've gone through this in the last month and it was an absolute nightmare. Um, so, what I found interesting in this example is that, the ecosystem partners included financial services, regulators, the dealers, the user themselves. And it almost becomes seamless in a way that your mind can't conceptualize because in a weird way we've become so used to our clunky system.
Yeah.
um, and this I think this particular example is for new vehicle registrations only. Am I correct at this stage?
At this stage, it is, but it can be conceived for transfer of ownership as well. If you buy yeah, from the secondary market, if you buy your vehicle there, essentially the steps that you have to follow through with your government authority are pretty similar. So it's not so much of a big deal anymore to adjust that. And you were touching on an interesting point that it connects so many different stakeholders, and this is really also one of our learnings that we've that we've made during that project. That it's a very simple idea, such a powerful idea, and it has the potential to streamline processes big time. We're talking reducing the time to register your car from a month to a few minutes. Um, However, it needs buy-in. It needs stakeholder buy-in. And this is the point that you were touching on, and this is why, and these were also the challenges that we faced in some way, especially when talking to regulators who are, uh, let's say, not not closed for innovation, but of course, if you want to innovate together with regulators, the processes are longer, the cycles are longer. It takes much more time and considerations of how to change, and it will be much more difficult too um, to acquire partners from the regulatory sector that will be with you on the journey for a period of a few years. Um, but then on the success side, you can see that once we got all these stakeholders on a table, you can actually create a solution that, is really, really powerful, and that also reflects um, the type of convenience that we expect from modern days.
So, Frank, I like to give credit where it's due. And I learned as recently as yesterday that in South Africa, you can now go and log these requests digitally. So that's a step forward. But your example is an absolutely powerful one. And I think, you know, with ESG or sustainability, these are long term futuristic goals that one's striving to, but it's about starting somewhere and finding those partners who are willing to, you know, be the early adopters. Because once you get that wave moving, then the momentum, I find, um, finds its feet quite soon.
And we're in a very interesting situation here currently. Again, looking at the textile industry, there have been talks around implementing digital product passports for many years now. And when you talk to the various stakeholders, and especially the powerful stakeholders in the textile industry, meaning brands, wholesale traders, retailers, um, you you get the impression that those digital product passports are long overdue, because it's those stakeholders who will tell you the various advantages, cost savings potential, efficiency improvement, sustainability improvement, um, that that a digital product would have. Still, mm, we don't see so much implementation yet. And that's interesting. And now, when we're talking about specific implementation projects, there's, of course, understandably, from the business side, always the question about ROI, especially short term ROI, um, in terms of how to properly roll this out. But what when we're in these projects and talking about concrete implementation, for me it's very interesting to see that only these questions are being asked, and the whole long-term view about yeah long-term improvements to your whole sector, basically, um, securing a competitive advantage uh, years before there will be a broad launch. All these aspects seem to be forgotten, and can only I can only think of one reason why this is the case. And mm, to me, it occurs that many companies really shy away from this level of deep collaboration with their suppliers, because you really need to implement these projects not on your own as a company, but together with your suppliers. You need to have a shared vision, and this is exactly where your point comes in, Roshni. That uh, we are really looking here at the pioneers of sustainability, where our first target groups are um, brands who really want to stand out because of their exceptional supply chain sustainability, product sustainability, and now they're just looking for a way to prove it. These will always be pioneer customers, and it will be those smaller companies who will basically set the tone for our sustainability conversations in the next years. It's a little bit. It can get a little bit frustrating at times because it's especially the larger companies who would actually have more influence on their supply chains and who would probably have an easier time um, following through such a big supply chain project with their supply network. But we see it in other parts of daily lives as well. We see it with vegan activism, climate activism, with vegan lifestyle. It's been always uh, coming from a small group of people, a small group of forward-thinking pioneers that understand that the way we are doing business right now, the way our consumption patterns are right now, are cannot go on like this forever, and change it actively despite all the barriers that they're being faced by conventional industry. And slowly but surely, we see the change also taking place in the wider society, and especially, yeah, you can see it especially here with vegan food in Berlin. It was quite interesting because I only moved recently to Berlin. It was quite interesting to me to see the change in German society versus years ago. That now it's basically every single restaurant has vegan alternatives. Every single convenience store, grocery store has a wide variety of vegan products, and it took society, yeah, 10 years plus to change their mindset in this regard. But unfortunately, we don't have this time anymore. So this is really an yeah, I'm really now asking everyone who listens in, everyone who has a product that they want to make more sustainable, to rethink your time frame, rethink the time you have left to make this world a better place, but also look at your competitors, look at your pioneer brands in the sustainability field, see what they are doing, and try not to lose touch, try not to lose, not to forget about progress in this aspect.
Frank, I think, this is potentially one of the benefits of legislation like the EU taxonomy, like the Green Deal objectives, and even the SEC in the US now is requesting or mandating for ESG information to be reported. And you can only manage what you measure. So I think best case scenario, when the data starts coming in, plus the collaboration starts happening in the value chains because of legislation. So suppliers and companies have to start talking together. We'll probably find that this starts stimulating reimagination of business models, and that spurs innovation. And that to me is the power of collaboration. And perhaps that's where the short term ROI lies, as you make the investment, take the journey, and then stick to it for the long term. I think when you get the real benefits, because with a younger generation, product stewardship, responsible product purchases, once you get that buy in early on and you continue your commitment to be that type of responsible company and uphold the good governance, let's call it that, you've got loyal customers for years on end, and that truly is a benefit, and that's how I see it. Frank, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, it will be a joint effort. Regulators play a big part in the transition, but also as a company, don't forget about your own responsibility. You, as a company, you are a corporate citizen, and you also have rights and obligations as part of your corporate citizenship. And unfortunately, this is, yeah, not in not so much present in the strategy and tactics of every company as it should be. But there's no sense in denying that fact. Companies are actors in our society like everyone else, and it's about self accountability. If you want to change something, a company doesn't need to wait for regulators. They can just spark the change, initiate the change. Especially, and that's why I'm saying it's a joint effort. Especially if you have the right customer base, if you have a customer base that supports those kind of moves and that will reward your efforts and reward your moves with, as you said, increased loyalty, but also um, also increased, increase purchases in general. Because as I said, if I'm able to verify a claim that's made towards sustainability, I'm much more likely to spend that money on a product, no matter if I'm a loyal customer or not. And then I will transform into a loyal customer because that product is worthwhile, quality is not compromised, and I can really trace the impact that I have made by my purchase decision versus buying another product that has no disclosure or from which I know that it has been through worse processes and has caused more emissions. And here, this is where where the link comes together and where it really all lines up. If you have a customer base that is supportive of corporate citizenship, if you have regulators that push towards product stewardship, and if you have companies who don't only react to those pushes, but take these um, take these conditions as an incentive to just pioneer product stewardship and start from your own without waiting. There's no need to wait.
Frank, I had no doubt that this was going to be a fascinating and gripping conversation. It really was. So we've just over the hour mark. I want to really thank you for dedicating your last working day to have this conversation with us and take this opportunity to wish you and your family a wonderful festive season.
Thank you very much, Roshni. Thanks for having me, and wish you also very great Merry Christmas in the sun. I'm a little bit envious, but yes, talk soon, and you have a good day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frank. And to every single listener who followed the show for the year and for supporting my work on the channel. You are absolutely appreciated and never taken for granted. So, to you and to your families, have a wonderful, wonderful festive season. And we look forward to continuing the conversations in 2023. As you take a well deserved break, remember to lift as you rise so that together and with purpose, we can thrive. Take care and see you in the new year. Bye bye.